I think about it now and just think I was able to generally maintain a soft heart throughout that whole journey, and it was so much better for me. So much better for me, I think, spiritually, emotionally, mentally and physically. And that was just the grace of God and his coaching throughout this journey, and that message, that soft, forgiving heart is what's going to get you through this unscathed, or maybe not unscathed, I know the scars are there, but it's going to get you through in a healthy way. So I just so grateful that he helped me to do that.
Hello and welcome. I'm Tanya Reason, and this is The Gospel According to Mum, the show where we discuss the transformational work done in us by Jesus Christ as we live out motherhood and discipleship with him. My guest today is Anne-Maree Choi. Anne-Maree is a wife, mother, stepmother, mother-in-law and grandmother. She works now as a Christian counsellor and lifestyle coach in a private practice in Brisbane, Australia. She's also now the author of Heartbroken Yet Radiant, which shares her personal story of healing from intimate betrayal. In this episode, Anne-Maree shares how her husband's confession of an affair sparked an 8-year trudge with the Lord faithfully at her side through incredible hurt and grief, and then a process of healing. Finally, through God's amazing redemptive power and her own unwavering faithfulness, she was restored to life and the godly marriage she longed for. We look together at the nature of God's faithfulness and his call for us to bear that characteristic, as well as the destructive effect that refusing the call has on our own life and the lives of those around us. Hi Anne-Maree, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's really such a blessing to have you here this morning. I've had a chance to read your book, and I think that it's something that anyone could read and learn from, no matter whether they've been through the experience that you've been through or not, because it's so richly based on your journey with God. And I think you have hopes, don't you, that it will be a help and a light to others. That was your heart in writing it, wasn't it?
That's right. Well, good morning, Tanya, and it's just such an honour to be here this morning, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share more about my book. Yes, my book was written from a heart to help other people. I felt very strongly through my journey God's hand was on me, and he was teaching me life skills and principles that, well, for me personally, they held me in great stead and got me through this very difficult time. I felt very led by God to write the story. It wasn't something I ever intended to do. I did not set out to be an author. I never even thought of being an author. And it was in around 2018, 2019 where I began to feel a real check in my heart that God was speaking to me about something, but I didn't know what it was. And this experience went on for about 3 weeks, and it was agitating me. I was like, oh, God is speaking to me. Something's not right. And I was praying and I was seeking. I'm going, am I in the wrong job? Am I doing the wrong thing here, Lord? Or what, is there something you want me to do? And I think that wrestling period was actually very key, because it really convinced me that this was indeed God's will for me to write this book. So when the day of realization happened, a great burden lifted, and he spoke to me very clearly. He said, I want you to write your story, and it will help other women who have gone through what you went through. So that was very clear direction from him.
Yeah.
I then have to say that he just enabled me to do it. He just provided a space where I could just write uninterrupted, and he would just speak to me, and it was like, now write about this and now write about this. So I really felt his hand on the format of the book, everything about it. There were parts I put in, I'd say, no, I didn't feel right about that. Take that out. I was like, are you sure? He's like, yes. So I just had to trust him. So I can certainly very easily just say this was God's work. I was just the vessel throughout the writing of it.
Yeah. That's been very consistent actually with other women that I've spoken to who've written books or written anything. We're of course going to focus on your experience of intimate betrayal, and I think it is a very important thing to talk about in a Christian context, because it's something I think that gets glossed over, or worse, treated in a worse way, an unmerciful way. And I think we need to really understand the depth of it from God's perspective. So your experience was your husband confessed to an affair and you sought to heal and rebuild, but then he did return to the affair and finally you were unable to reconcile and the marriage ended in divorce. The book takes us through the details of that story from your perspective, but it begins with looking back at some of the details of your childhood, which have been important. And so why don't we start with a bit of background with regard to your faith up until the point of your marriage. So you grew up in a church, didn't you? In a church environment.
Yes, I did. I was born into a very proud Baptist family. My grandmother had been eldest of 8 and she had been the first one to come to Jesus. And so there was just a real excitement and as her whole life changed, and that was imparted to my father. And then my mother also had been born again at about the age of 16 and born again into the Baptist church. So there was a real steadfast commitment there and excitement about God, which is what I was born into. So we just regularly went my whole childhood. My mum was the superintendent of the local Sunday school, and so I was going to Sunday school every week and then going to church afterwards. And God was just very much part of my life. My mum was a real prayer and she would model that. And so I knew that God was real. So as a child, I would pray just childlike prayers. And I found that it was easy for me to go, I'm going to live my life for God. That was just a given. And I don't know why I was like that. I never really wanted to rebel. I didn't want to stray away. I just had this sense that why would I want to walk away from this source of love and protection in my life? That was just like the air that I breathed, and very easy for me, and I'm very grateful for that. So it was around the age of 12 I gave my life to Christ, and that only happened because my Sunday school teacher took me to a youth rally with some friends, and they did an invitation at the end of it, and my friends all wanted to go down the front, and I was like, I don't really need to go because I love God. I know that God is real. But I went, I'll go too. I didn't want to be left behind. So not very good motivation. But I ended up going down the front and said what we call the sinner's prayer, and just felt a real change in my heart. It just felt so clean. It felt squeaky clean. I felt alive. I felt joyful. And I remember going home and telling my mum, my heart feels so different. And she said, yeah, that's what happens. And I was just really, really thrilled about that. It was very unexpected. And I just continued to read my Bible, go to youth group and listen to Christian music, all of those things, and pray and develop my relationship with God. And then I think it took another turn, if you like, to a deeper place when my cousin, she was same age as me, and there was 3 of us. We were all 2 months apart. We were very close. But one of these cousins, she died tragically when we were all 15. And this was an incredible shock. And so from that point on, my whole world changed. I realised that death was really real. And I realised that I had to make my life count if I wanted to be with God. And I think something in my heart just got deeper. I just went, I want to be baptised. I want to live my life serving Christ. That was just the desire that came out of that tragedy. So I proceeded to be baptised. And up until the time I got married, I just did everything I can to grow in the Lord. I just loved God. I loved worship. I loved his word. I loved Christian music, bands like Petra and David Meese. I'd be in my bedroom doing my homework with the music just blaring and just letting the words just seep into me and really set the tone for how I was going to live my adult life, I believe. So
yeah, that's really interesting, and we come back to that point later when we talk about this. The central, it's literally the central part of your book. But so you had a very close relationship with the Christian life at this point. You were walking it, and you wanted to be there, and you'd met your husband early on, and sort of grown up together, and had married, and you'd started a church together with some other families, and so things were going well, and you'd had 2 children born to you. You were now a mum, but it was after the birth of your second child, that Blake, and we'll call him Blake, this is the name that you use in the book, that Blake dropped the first bombshell. Mm-hmm. And so what happened on that day?
Okay, well, the time leading up to that had been, I guess, preparing the way in that things just weren't good in our marriage. He was very depressed and very removed from me in the home, which is a lot of contrast to how he was in public. And this had been going on for quite a few months, and I had got to the point where I started to put a lot of pressure on him to tell me why he was acting so depressed, because he wouldn't talk about it. He would just be silent. And this was very foreign behaviour to me, so I just really was very confused. I didn't know what was going on. The day of his confession, I was at a friend's house, and he called me while I was at my friend's house. He says, "I need you to come home." And I was like, "Oh, okay, why?" And he said, I just need to talk to you. Can you come home? Which, again, was very foreign behaviour. He'd never done anything like that before. But my heart started to feel very heavy, and I was reluctant to hurry. So he then texted me a little while later saying, "Can you please come home?" And I said, "Oh, all right, I better go." So I told my friend I've got to go. And she said, "Oh, let me pray for you before you go." And I said, "Oh, okay, that's, of course." So we prayed. And I remember her praying and saying to me, "Help Anne-Maree to be the wife that Blake needs today." And I thought, oh, that was just an interesting prayer. So I guess I went home with some trepidation. I was like, oh, something's really not right.
It's interesting, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt you, but it is interesting, because I was just thinking as you were talking, if my husband had texted me with that, I would have thought, what's happened? You know, like, are the kids okay? You know, it would have been a sort of a panic. But it feels like your heart was heavy already. You do you think you had a sense that there was something different about it, wasn't there?
There was something different about it. I had no idea what he was going to say. It was a big, big shock. It wasn't anywhere on my radar that this would ever have happened. So I was just very confused and just, I guess, operating instinctively. Like I knew something was heavy, but I just thought, well, I've got to go home. So I walked in the front door and I put our 4-year-old down for her nap. She was still having naps when she was 4. And I went and sat at the dining room table, and we sort of sat at opposite ends. And he said, "I've got something to tell you that's going to hurt you very deeply." And I was like, my mind was just swimming. I was like, what on earth is he talking about? What is going on? And I knew from what he said that it was going to hurt. So I guess I began to brace myself for the hurt. And so he just said to me, about a year ago, I had an affair. And my reaction was just a complete shock. And I knew what he was saying, like it made sense to me. And I knew he's been unfaithful. And I guess like this crumbling effect was happening all around me. It just really felt like everything was my world. When you hear people say their world crumbled, I know what they mean. It just all seemed to shatter and fall down. Like, so I didn't go straight into denial. There was a realisation about what he was saying, and I just cried. I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And then a bit of clarity came to my mind, and I thought, who with? Like, I just couldn't imagine anyone that he would have had an affair with at that point. And he told me that it was the name of a former co-worker. And when he said her name, I just went, oh, of course. It made sense to me that it would be her, just the way he acted when he was around her, the way she continually kept calling him, in out of hours time. So I guess at that point, deeper realisation set in and things just went quiet for a while. And I just started to really panic. And I just turned to the Lord at that point. I said, what do I do, Lord? What do I do? What am I going to do? And I talk about this in the book, so I won't go into it now. But I was just at a point where I had my mind changed to the point that I thought adultery is forgivable. And so I had not believed that in the past. I had thought it was the unforgivable sin. It was how could anybody do that to their spouse? But yes, God had changed my heart to go, well, it's not the end of the world, and God can do something amazing when there's been adultery in a marriage. So I was in a place of faith there already. So the words that came out of my mouth, I actually didn't don't remember thinking them before I spoke them, but I just said, well, I forgive you. And I was shocked that I even said that, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to choose the path of forgiveness and redemption further down the track. And I just had this knowing that that first step, that choice to choose the path of forgiveness, even though I knew forgiveness couldn't happen straight away, it's obviously a journey. I knew I had to take that path. I had two paths. I had bitterness and I had forgiveness. They were the two roads before me. And so I knew I was ready to go, yes, I need to choose the path of forgiveness because I need to survive this and I want our marriage to survive this. And so he was shocked. He was shocked when I said that because in the past he knew how I'd felt about adultery, and I guess he was preparing himself to be kicked out that day. But when it didn't happen, he was a bit of a loss. He didn't quite know what to do with himself.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Once you have a face on something, those sort of concrete beliefs or judgments that you have in your heart, once you put a human face on it, it's amazing how it can change. It's just, I guess, why we need to be together as, believers and see the humanity of these things. But also God has obviously enabled you. What that speaks to me is that you were faithful to God in that moment and did what he would want you to do. Interestingly, this I found harder to imagine was at that point after Blake had left you to be alone and to think, you turned to worship. I thought that was amazing. What made you make that choice at that moment?
Well, yes, he left to go and pick up our daughter from preschool, I think it was at the time. And I remember when he shut the door and left, I crumbled again. I felt like I had been kicked in the guts, like I keeled over and fell to the ground and just lay on the ground completely broken, sobbing because, he was my everything. He was, makes me teary talking about it, even though I just go back to that place that I loved him so much. And I loved our marriage, I loved our family, and that was all just broken now. And so I was on the ground, I was weak, I was heartbroken, and my thoughts were turning to God, what do I do, Lord? What do I do with this? We're pastors of a church, we have like 200 people in the church. What a mess. And the story came to my mind as I cried out to God about what to do, and it was Darlene Check from Hillsong. She told a story that when she'd had a miscarriage with her third pregnancy, she was driving home from the ultrasound and she was crying, and God spoke to her and said, I want you to worship me. And she was like, what? That goes against my nature. But she decided to be obedient, and she talked about how it just lifted her to be in God, I guess. And that's what was in my mind. I thought, if I do that, then I'm bringing a supernatural answer to this problem, to this mess, and I can't handle this on my own. It is too big a mess. It was, the enormity of it was overwhelming. It was against my grain. I was like, how could I do something like that? How ridiculous is what I was thinking. But again, God just had me so primed for this, and I'm just so grateful for his faithfulness to me to have me prepared. So I pulled out a CD and just popped it on, and then I stood up and started to sing the songs that came on. And I just went, I've got to declare his truth. And I said, he is a God who is El Shaddai. He is the God who is more than enough for any situation. And he is more than enough for this situation. And with everything in me, just spoke out those words. And his peace just flooded in like it was so real. And my heart was still aching. It was hurting, don't get me wrong. But the sense of his presence at that point was like, yeah, you're doing the right thing. Keep going, keep going. Yeah. So I went for a bit longer, and then I started to doubt. And I went, what am I doing? This is just weird. Those thoughts really came in. And then as I stopped and I started to sort of sat down again, my feelings just started to plummet and despair started to come in. And I just went, oh, no, I don't like that. I want his presence back. And so I said, okay, this is going to be my stance, that God, who is more than enough for any situation. And so I turn the music back on and I worship for a bit longer, and it helps stabilize me.
Yeah, I mean, worship it's such a healing thing, and I love what you said about it brings God into it, and it acknowledges his sovereignty over the situation. He was obviously with you before it happened, and so loving and merciful. And it's not about him needing our praise, is it? It's a function of his love for us in a sort of flipped around way. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, I think it connects us to him. It goes beyond the natural realm and just goes into that supernatural realm at a step of faith. And I guess it just opens up the window for him to move. So I love worship.
Yeah. And then, of course, you are also in the human realm, and you're not, it's not just your family, you're also leading a church, as you said. And I read this in a book by Sean Gladding. He was talking about that sin is social. And so it's never just the immediate impact. The sin that has occurred in your life is also going to have an impact on so many people around you. And so straight away, you've been called to be faithful to God, which he enabled you to do, and you found easy because of your love for him. But then you were called to be faithful to his church as well, weren't you? You had to go then and have the conversation. How did that go?
Well, I actually wasn't part of that conversation. So after Blake dropped our daughter home, he then went to see our overseeing pastor, and they called a meeting with two other couples who were our core senior leadership team who'd been there from the beginning of the church. And so because the affair had happened 15 months earlier, and it had just gone for a period of about 6 weeks, and then he had ended it and then hadn't seen her since. The thought was, well, he's made a mistake. Well, he's done the wrong thing, sorry, more than a mistake. But he seems to have repented and moved on, like it is in the past. And so all 6 of the people Blake was speaking to came to the same conclusion that, all right, well, we'll put Blake into accountability and to counselling, and we'll just keep going ahead with the church business as usual, because the church was going very well despite Blake's depression, which I only saw. Yeah, so it seemed the right thing to do at the time, because I guess the other option was for it to come out and to step down from ministry. But yes, because it had happened the year earlier, 15 months earlier, it just, well, the church is just going so well, so let's just keep going forward. So that's what was decided. And I felt that was the right thing. I was glad that we didn't have to bring it out in the open. I think I was quite naive as to how deeply I'd been wounded. I thought that my faith in God and the friendships that I had would hold me in good stead throughout the healing process and the restoration process for our marriage. I had full expectation that our marriage could be healed. So, yes, we sort of just went into going ahead business as usual quite confidently. Yes, but I was very broken down.
Yeah, that was a point that I really picked up on in the book, because they'd offered you counselling, and the church was going to help you through with that. But you didn't take it because, as you say, you said, I had not realised how deeply wounded I was. And I think we don't talk enough, or very well, in church actually, generally, about how critical faithfulness is as a concept, because it's actually a core part of the very nature of God. When I was thinking about this, I was reminded of it's 2 Timothy 2:11-13, and it says, "It is a trustworthy statement, for if we died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he will also deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, because he cannot deny himself."
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, and it really, in all of those points, he matches our behaviour, but he will never be unfaithful. That unfaithfulness is a characteristic that we possess, but it just is not God's characteristic. And so it has to be utterly destructive, doesn't it, as a concept, unfaithfulness. And then as you go on through the book, you actually talked about you developed an allergic reaction to your husband. That was fascinating. Tell us about that.
All right. So it was April 2001 when the confession happened. So then by November 2002, things were very strained at home. But as I say in the book, it was very confusing because on the surface, Blake acted like everything was okay. He acted like a loving husband. When he'd talk about me to others, he'd speak of me warmly and lovingly. He would give me birthday cards or Mother's Day cards just saying how much he appreciated me. We'd have date nights. But deep down, there was this massive chasm between us. And his weekly schedule was that he would be quite busy on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings during the week. But then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, he would be more around. And I started noticing I started getting this eczema, so just under my eyebrows. And so when I would be with him from that Thursday to Sunday, it would flare up and it was awful. It just looked like I had too much eyeshadow on. But then that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, when he was out in the evenings, it would get better because I didn't really see him for those days. And so this was cyclic. It just kept happening from like November to March. And as I started to see the cycles, it took me a while to see the cycles. I'm going, what is going on? Obviously, I'm feeling very, very stressed when I'm around him. There is something that's really upsetting me, even though I couldn't put my finger on what the problem was.
Yeah, and you were faithfully committed to restoration in your marriage. And Blake was going through the motions, but his heart wasn't really in it, was it?
Oh, I wouldn't even say he was going through the motions. I think he just checked out of the marriage by then. He was making plans for another life. And perhaps the conviction that was on him that he was a pastor. The church had grown to 300 people by that point, and it was quite a dynamic church. And the conviction that he was standing up there every Sunday preaching and praying for people, yet living this double life. I think that perhaps the spiritual turmoil that was going on inside of him was something I was picking up on, as I'm quite discerning. So,
yeah. And then it was on your 10th wedding anniversary, literally on the celebration, that he revealed to you that he'd been physically unfaithful yet again. And how did that unfold?
So we went away for a few days. I was hopeful that it was going to be a time, just the two of us, to really connect and talk. I guess I just always looking for opportunities to connect with him and to be able to talk at a deep level, but he would never engage. So we went away as we drove the 2 hours to our destination. I was feeling very hopeful, but he just wouldn't talk in the car. He was just very, very aloof and quiet. He kept getting texts. I said, "Oh, who's texting you?" And he just shrugged it off, wouldn't answer. So my heart started to sink at that point. I went, this is just going to be another disappointing time with him. And I was really disappointed because I felt like 10-year anniversary was certainly very special. And we got to our destination and we went and had dinner. And again, he was just very, very sober during dinner. And I was just like, what is going on, Blake? Like, we're out here, we're away for our 10th anniversary and you won't talk to me. What is going on? He just got up and walked away. And again, I just didn't even twig that he would have gone back to the affair. And he'd always wanted to be a pastor and he was doing his life dreams. Like, everything was going so well. And so I thought, why would he jeopardize our life for that? So again, I was just like, maybe my mind didn't want to go there. Maybe God just had protected me. I don't know. Maybe people might have called me naive or, why didn't you see that? Which some people have actually said to me, but you trust, love always trusts. And I had chosen to love and to trust him. And that was very real. So we just went back to the place we were staying, and then he just decided to go to the main hall and play some pool, and I said, fine, I'll just go to bed. So I went to bed crying out to God, Lord, I don't know what's going on, but I trust you. And he eventually came back in and I couldn't sleep, and so it was 11:30 at night, and I just sat up in bed and I said, Blake, I can't sleep. I need you to tell me what is going on. I can't sleep. This is just really, really distressing. And so he sat up, and we were both sitting on our sides of the bed but facing the opposing walls. So our backs were to each other. And he put his head in his hands, and I saw him do that. And then he just said, I went back to the affair. I've been seeing Anna for the last 18 months. And I was just absolutely floored. I was just shocked. Again, shock just overwhelmed me. But I heard the pain in his voice, the agony, the anguish in his voice was there. And my heart had been so conditioned by that point to show him grace and compassion that I actually turned to him and put my hand out in response to the pain I heard in his voice. And he just slapped it away and said, "Don't you be nice to me." And I went, oh my goodness, this is real. And I think the emotion that sank in was just defeat. I just felt so defeated. I'd been fighting for this marriage. I'd been praying. I'd been doing everything I could to give room for God to do a miracle in it. But he'd gone back and just my head was just spinning all the logistics of when, how, what that was going on. And I then just felt like I was going to vomit. So I ran to the toilet and I bent over and I just started sobbing and I was dry retching, and it would have been easier if I'd vomited, but I couldn't. And I was just dry retching and crying. And I remember, in the toilet, just hearing my sobs echoing around the tiles type thing, and the window was open. And I thought, oh, people can hear me. What do they think? It's a funny thought to think. But, and I just had this picture of this woman who's just been so beaten down and so defeated. So I let the sobs take their process, and then I went back into the bedroom when I'd calmed down, and he said, "Do you want me to go in the other room to sleep?" And I said, "Yes, please." And so I was still nice to him. I mean, the person I am now, I probably would have yelled and screamed, which I probably needed to do, but I didn't. This is just how I reacted. And I just tried to go to sleep, and I had a peace. The peace was there, but I knew everything was going to be different this time. I thought, there's no covering this up. This has got to change. I can't keep living with him with this underlying turmoil. I was just very aware of the allergic reaction I've been having. I thought, he just stresses me so much. This time everything's going to be different, and we're going to have to step down from ministry. So I was still thinking quite logically. And I remember sleeping very fitfully that night, but just aware. I had a real sense that God was in the room with me, that Jesus was there, and that he had me. That was very, very real. And I knew that there was a lot that was going to have to happen, but I wasn't worried about that. I knew that God would lead me through it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we struggle to do good, but I mean, you were praying for a miracle in your marriage, but God didn't impose anything on Blake. He continued to make his own choices, and you continued to make your own choices. And certainly the way that you were talking, he was with you and he was helping you, but you also chose to lean into that help. You had to then, of course, go to the church and tell everybody what had happened, and then also attend services, which was very difficult. But you say an amazing thing. You said, church was not the place to process my anger. And I actually felt a strong conviction from the Lord that I needed to maintain an attitude of respect toward Blake, regardless of what he had done, as he was still a dearly loved and valued child of God. What an amazing thing to say. And you were called to be faithful to the character of Christ. And that is just Matthew. That's Matthew 5:39 to me. That is, for whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. And you'd been slapped on both cheeks now, and still you were called to turn your cheek again, weren't you?
Yes. I had a real conviction about that, and God had shown me a picture of that. I was worshipping, and I was in a lot of pain this particular day. So we're in worship, we're in church. And I just said, Lord, I'm just having so much trouble respecting him right now. And I was being very honest and pouring out my heart to the Lord. And then I just had this picture of Jesus coming alongside Blake and putting his hand on his shoulder. And I saw that regardless of what had happened or how he had behaved, that God was still for Blake. Like Jesus loved him. And obviously God deals with sin in the way he does. But that was the truth that I saw very, very clearly, and I knew that it was good for me to stay in that place of showing Blake that unconditional respect. And that was something he actually thanked me for years later. That was nice.
Yeah.
Have that acknowledgement.
Absolutely. And so he then leaves the home, and you are now on your own, and not only having to cope with your own emotional turmoil, the loneliness and the anger and everything else, but you're also having to deal with the emotional well-being of your girls. That was a lot to carry, wasn't it?
That was horrible. Still, again, it makes me tear up when I think about it.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. And they're lying in bed at night crying for their dad and not knowing what to say to them. I think that out of everything, even 20 years on, I look back and go, just the fact that he walked away from his daughters just breaks my heart when he just be given every opportunity to not do that. But yes, particularly my younger daughter, she would cry. My older daughter would hold it in a bit more. But yes, I got very angry on those times. Just I'd call him and say, can you speak to them? Because I don't know what to say to them. I mean, I came up with a narrative, a story. I said, look, which wasn't good. Like in hindsight, I probably wouldn't choose to do it again. But I just said, look, Daddy has told some very big lies and he needs to go away to deal with those, and that's why he's left. And that was true, but I don't know that it was the right thing to do. But anyway, that's what I did. And it gave them a bit of an answer. But yeah, their pain and their longing for him was very distressing to watch.
Yeah. That's one thing I've started to do in my life as I get older. Whenever I make a decision about something, I say to myself, Tanya, I want you to remember in 10 years' time that you're making this decision today with the best information you have in front of you.
Yes.
And don't do the shoulda, woulda, coulda thing in 10 years, please, because, you were doing your best. I try and say that to myself
Yes.
because I know that later on I'm going to go, But you say another wonderful thing. You say, I knew only God could help me, and I was not wrong. The Lord's continual message to me was that I needed to keep my heart soft and maintain an attitude of forgiveness, which is a wonderful thing to say. And you were able to, for the most part, manage that, weren't you?
Oh, yes, and I'm so grateful that I was able to do that, that was the Lord's continual message to me. And my heart, don't get me wrong, I had angry days. I had days when I hated him and I said it out loud. But it's like God would allow me to walk through that process, but then I'd hear his voice now, okay, you've released your anger. You now need to move to that stance on forgiveness again. And he was so faithful, bringing up that theme of faithfulness to keep reminding me. I mentioned in the book how one stage I got so angry I took off my wedding rings and said, I'm not wearing these anymore. And I didn't really hear his conviction for a day or two. And I thought, I've got away with this. Great.
This must be the Lord's will.
This must be the Lord's will. Yeah. And then one of my friends, my Christian friends, came and I saw her and she said, Anne-Maree, I've noticed that you've taken your wedding rings off. And I was like, okay, all right, Lord, I'll put them back on again.
Yeah.
And so just driving home that message, keep your heart soft, keep your heart in that place of being open to forgiveness. And it was a lifesaver. I think about it now and just think I was able to generally maintain a soft heart throughout that whole journey, and it was so much better for me, so much better for me, I think, spiritually, emotionally, mentally and physically. And that was just the grace of God and his coaching throughout this journey, and that message, that soft, forgiving heart is what's going to get you through this unscathed, or maybe not unscathed, I know the scars are there, but it's going to get you through in a healthy way. So I just so grateful that he helped me to do that.
Yeah, I think what your story shows me is there's a very important distinction that we don't often see or make, in that God was calling you to behave a certain way towards Blake, not because he wanted you to be faithful to Blake, but because he wanted you to be faithful to him. And so the outflow of your faithfulness to God was, a righteous stance towards, a fellow man, and sometimes we flip that around the other way, and it doesn't lead to the kind of outcome that we would hope for. And so from that perspective, there's 107 physical pages in your book, and I don't know if you intended this, but right in the middle on page 53, I actually counted because I thought this is amazing. There's this beautiful diadem entitled "Jesus, the Husband Who Does Not Disappoint," and this is important for what you were saying at the beginning, because you had this amazing love for God and the Christian life. But as you talk about, I'm going to get you to talk about these little 3 pages of wonder, because you actually say at one point, I didn't want a closer relationship with God. I wanted a real husband. But your story has taught you differently, hasn't it?
Jesus' husband. Well, yes. Well, I mean, I'd heard it preached at church, that concept, and I always thought that's just way weird. I just don't get that. Like, I was comfortable with that. So, and I was quite happy at that point, as you said, with my relationship with God. I thought, I don't need it to go deeper. I want my husband back. That's how I felt. And as the months went past through my healing journey, I could hear that theme coming up again in my quiet times, and just went, okay, all right. He had to back me. I say in the book, he backed me into a corner, and he did. I just said, I've got to address this. It keeps coming up. What do you mean, Lord? And how do I go there? So I think the first thing I had to do was just surrender to it and just say, all right, Lord, I'm now open to learning what it means for you to be my husband. And that was just that first step. And I guess the first thing I did was look up all scriptures pertaining to it and wrote them out. And I think there's a couple that I write in the book, but I particularly love the one in Hosea where it just says, I'm going to take you into the wilderness and I'm going to show you my faithfulness, and I'm going to show you that I'm not just your master, but I'm your husband. And I went, wow, that's where I am. I'm in the wilderness. Okay, so this is what this is all about. So I really opened my heart to allow revelation to come in on that issue, and I started to refer to him as my husband in my thoughts, and just started to really shift my thinking and trying to grasp what it meant to be one with Christ, to be in that union. And he did. He came into my heart in a very, very real, steadfast way, a way that I could physically feel. And I loved it, because as I began to relate to him as my husband, I just went, oh, this is fantastic. Like, I can rely on him for all these other things.
Yes, yeah.
And I really started to rely on him. I guess that revelation allowed me to rely on him in a more practical sense at that point, in regard to provision and keeping me safe when, I did things that were out of my comfort zone. And he did. He was so faithful. And so I look back on the 5 years that I was a single mum, and there's joy when I look back, because I was lonely and obviously dealing with a lot of pain and anguish during that time, but I had a great 5 years in hindsight. So when time came for me to marry again, it was like, well, what do I do now? I've got a physical husband. But it's just learning that union with Christ is never going to change. I'm going to be with him for eternity, and just keeping him in my heart in that very real way. It's a very internal experience.
Yeah, I think, however, whatever relationship is the deepest relationship for you, he is going to be the perfect version of that, isn't he? He's going to fulfill everything that you need in whatever relationship that is. One of the quotes that you used was Isaiah 54:5, and it was particularly poignant because it reads, he is your Redeemer. And it made me think of the story of Ruth. And I was thinking back through it, her quintessential quality was faithfulness. And Boaz says to her, as her kinsman redeemer, that was the word that sort of drew me into it. You could have chased after the younger guys. You could have looked at the physical, but you chose me. And he was this beautiful, devoted, faithful man of God. And Ruth's choice was to go with this picture of God, in a sense, rather than the physical. I've never seen it before until I read your story and saw that quote. I thought, this is so deep, this union with God. I love that you said that it was this wonderful time for you, because I think you don't realize until you allow yourself to seek it that union is so fulfilling, isn't it? And you feel like you've only tapped, a tiny part of the depths of the union that you could be in with God. Mm. Yes. And really springs of living water. But I mean, I could go on for hours, but we won't. We'll jump back into your story, because we're really just skimming the surface. And I encourage everyone to go and find the book and read it. There'll be details shared on the show platforms of Anne-Maree's book, which is entitled Heartbroken Yet Radiant, A Story of Healing from Intimate Betrayal. And so now Blake comes back and wants to reconcile again. And you really wanted to leave, but you felt that God was still calling you to be faithful to your marriage. How was that for you to hold on to that thought?
So he came back 15 months after he left. And so I guess there was a love, but it wasn't the same love like I had. That was gone because he was not the man that I married at all. He was a very, very different person by then. But I had faith. It was about faith, because I knew that God could create a new marriage. And if both hearts were committed to him and surrendered is a key word there, to his leading and to where he wanted to take us. I had faith, but that, I guess, is what helped me to take that stance. And also just for my daughter's sake, that their parents' marriage could be restored. I think that was another reason to be hopeful that God could do something. But personally, I was just like, this has just been awful. I don't really want to go back into all that pain, but I just had that trust that whatever you want, Lord, just that same prayer when I was 15 of surrender. I'm here to serve you. I'm not here to build my own kingdom. I'm here to build yours. So, yes.
Yeah, what comes through in your story is your experience of the Holy Spirit was not. I mean, there were moments that were very profound, but also we tend to forget this, is that he's a ministering spirit of truth. So you really have the sense of these gentle whispers of faithfulness to follow the model and the commands of Christ. Not these huge miracles, but just be faithful, Anne-Maree. Just be faithful, Anne-Maree. Just going on. And I think that's a beautiful thing to remember. But then finally, divorce was still in your future. It was in your future. And how did that then unfold?
Well, he decided that it was too hard. That's what he told mutual friends of ours. That was too hard to work on. And I actually had prompted and said, what's happening? You're coming back to live in the same city so that we could pursue marriage counselling, and you're not arranging anything. And I said, were you wanting divorce? And then I was surprised that I even used that word, and he looked really shocked. But then this was just after he returned the girls after a visitation. And he then left, and he came back 2 weeks later and returned again. He'd had the girls for the weekend and returned them, and they said, look, I've decided to proceed with divorce. And I was angry and shocked at that choice. And I said, well, I actually still believe God can heal this marriage. So that's my stance. So this is your decision. I won't fight you on it. I said, but you are taking complete responsibility for it, and you can pay for it, and you can do all the paperwork. I said, because this is your choice, not mine. And he said, yep, fair enough. So he just proceeded with it. I still, every time, I received the paperwork or something had to happen pertaining to it, I was still shocked that he was going through with it, even to the day he went to court. And I was actually visiting my mother-in-law that day, and a lot of people were praying that God would intervene and speak to him and he would have hope for the marriage. So I was still not sure what was going to happen. I was very surrendered. Well, Lord, you know what you want to do. I'm just your vessel, just waiting here. But he texted me while I was at my mother-in-law's. I said, it's done. And he said, I'm really sorry. And he called me Anne. And I was just really angry at that point. I just texted him back and said, I used some really choice words. I said, you are not sorry, because if you were sorry, this would not be happening. But the finality of that was a shock, but it felt had such a feeling of finality about it. And then there's a month between when you file to when it actually becomes confirmed. And I was really surprised at the grief that I experienced in that month, because it was almost 2 years after we'd first separated. And I thought I'd done all my, big crying, but actually really, it was awful. It was very, very painful. Just something very deep down inside of me was just hurting so badly, and I just had to cry it out. And I remember journaling and writing out, I actually feel like I've terminated this marriage, like it's like an abortion in a way. That's just the picture that was in my mind, and that it was being killed, it was dying right now. So I was surprised at that level of grief, but as I walked through it, it was quite incredible that the day that marked the final nail in the coffin, if you want to say, it's like everything lifted, and it's like the slate was wiped clean, and my future just felt different. It felt bright, it felt adventurous, and it felt like Blake was behind me, that it was truly, well and truly over. And that was another interesting feeling that I experienced.
Yeah, probably people listening to this will be surprised. And I wasn't. You said you went through a period of repentance, really, of being sorry, for the marriage ending and talking to God about it. And that this was actually not sort of a feeling of punishment, if you like, but it was a healing thing.
It was
to do. Yeah.
I don't really understand why I needed to do that, because I'm very aware that that we confess our sins and Christ cleanses us. But there was just an evening there where I felt like I was kneeling before his throne, just apologising for everything that happened. Maybe I was apologising on behalf of Blake. I don't know. They were the words in my heart. So I'm so sorry, Lord. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that we made such a mess of this sacred gift of marriage. It was, you're right, it was healing, and I'm glad I did it. Like it felt like it was what needed to be done. I don't understand it. So that's what happened.
Yeah. And then you had to get on with life. And you say this about the slate being wiped clean. And I think that's really important, because when something like this happens, and I have seen it to heartbreaking effect, where people are then sort of trapped in a sin that's been imposed on them, and they can't accept that God is merciful and God has plans and provision for life. Not that we should stay locked in those places, but that he has mercy on us, doesn't he? To go forward.
He does. I'm so grateful for his redemption, for the hope of a new life. And I realise, in Old Testament days that it could have been very different. Like, with the law being broken, adultery, could I have remarried? Would I have been alone for the rest of my life? I don't know. But I just love the truth that the blood of Jesus just cleanses and then redeems. He just brings so much beauty from ashes. That's what is just so amazing about Jesus, that when we do trust him with the process of repentance and doing and following his ways, and he just then takes what we've given him and the sacrifices that entailed and just create something beautiful. And I'm so grateful for that, because my life just would have been, I was 35 years old when I remarried. So that's sort of where my a new life started again. So I was, 32 when I got divorced. And so I still had a lot of living to do.
Yeah.
I wanted to be married again. I wanted to build a family. There were just very, very deep desires in my heart. So I am very grateful for his redemption.
Yeah. And there was faithfulness found in Christians around you who obviously saw and understood that as well. And I think we all need to remember that as followers of Christ, because this wonderful couple who organised these dinners, when I read it, I was so grateful to them for loving you and other women. Tell us about those dinners.
After a year of being in the church that we pastored, I moved to a sister church because it just was an easier option for me at that point. So I was with people who had seen everything that had happened and knew what was going on, but I wasn't still in that situation. And there were two other women in the church who were going through similar experiences to mine. I mean, obviously different details, but they'd both been betrayed and abandoned by their husbands. So this couple in the church decided that every second Friday night they were going to invite us over, and we just all had to bring a potluck meal. And for the first part of the evening, they put us in their lounge room, us three ladies, and they served us wine and cheese, and they just left us to chat. And they took the children and looked after the children in the backyard type thing. And then we would all, after about an hour, we would then all go and have dinner together and spend the evening all together. And it was so beautiful, so healing to be served. I love that they would come in and treat us like queens. And just to have the opportunity just to talk very candidly about, our bad days and things like that. And we were very mindful that we didn't want this to become a men-hating club. So we were very mindful not to go down that road, although we all had moments where we got very upset. But just the love of this couple to do that for us, they really honoured us and honoured our pain. And again, I get teary thinking about it.
Oh, I can understand that. It was such a precious thing to see, and for you to be able to, testify that those people did that. I mean, that is really being faithful to Christ. But what you said there about not becoming a man-hating club, and we won't dwell on this, but, even after the marriage, things don't change. Like, you are still called to be faithful to Christ, but now in a different way. And you had a secular friend offer you a piece of advice on how you could feel better, and you had to make a faithful choice again, didn't you? What did she?
I was just having a bad day. Gone for a walk. It was just a mum from school, and she said, "You know what you need, Anne-Maree?" I said, "What?" She said, "You need a one-night stand." And she said, "I did that when my marriage broke up, and that just, was fun." And I said, I just internally really chuckled. I said, I could never, that's just not me at all. So, and I very politely said that I just don't think that's me. But that thought was not appealing at all. For me, it's not the way I'm wired. So it just made me smile.
Yeah, that's right. But you were, choices were being presented to you, and you were still, having to make the choice to be faithful to Christ and to his way, and all of those sorts of things. And then God did have a plan for you, didn't he, for the godly marriage that you so desired.
Yes, he did.
And he showed you a picture of it before it unfolded, didn't he?
Yes. So after the divorce went through, it's like God did begin to speak to me about remarriage. And I believe he told me at that time I was going to marry a new Christian. So he's starting to prepare me, even though it was 3 years until I actually met my husband, Vin. And so I was a big walker. And there were obviously reflective times, and if I was feeling sad, I would go for a walk. And I remembered reading how many parrots mate for life, and I thought, oh, that's so lovely. Like, how lovely that God does that with some animals, with some birds. And as I went for this walk one day, I just saw these two rosellas just fly past me. I don't know if you ever noticed how they seem to fly around in pairs. They're riding waves and they're going up and down. And they went right in front of me. It just spoke to me about being married to somebody and being in unison and just doing life together. And I thought, oh, that's beautiful. And I thought, I hope I get that one day, Lord. And that was just my prayer. But the next time I went for a walk, I noticed the same thing happened. These two rosellas just kept flying in front of me. And it then, long story short, it just started happening every single day. So probably for 2.5 years, I would see two rosellas, crimson rosellas, just somewhere in my vicinity. Even once it was pouring rain and I looked out and there were two of them sitting on the fence outside. And it was that continual message of hope. I mean, I tried not to grasp onto the fact that another man was going to make everything okay, because I knew very well that, marriage is often hard work, but just the promise that the loneliness in my heart was one day going to recede. That's perhaps what the overall message was. And then there was a time when I was feeling particularly low and not in a place of faith, just feeling very depressed and having a very bad day. And my daughter had gone to a friend's house for a play date, and I had to go and pick her up about 4:00 in the afternoon. And as I walked up to the front door and knocked, I heard this really loud ruckus behind me. It was just like birds going nuts. It was quiet, and then all of a sudden it exploded in noise. And I looked around me, and about probably 50 metres off to the side was this massive tree that had no leaves on it because it was winter. It was just filled with rosellas. There were rosellas on every branch. I've never, ever since seen so many rosellas in one place, and the way they were just chirping so noisily. It was just incredible, really. I just said, "Oh, Lord, you're just really speaking to me right now, aren't you? Because that is a phenomenal sight. And all right, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to keep trusting you. I'm not going to go to this place of despair." So it was just so beautiful, so beautiful.
Yeah, everything he does is beautiful. Yeah, have a loving moment. I love God. He's so wonderful. I was thinking about, talking to you today. I was sitting in church yesterday, and weirdly, the story around David and Saul has come up over the last 3 days for me, just over and over. And I was reading it, and I suddenly came across this passage, and I thought, this is Anne-Maree, because you did meet this lovely man, and you've had family with him, and he had family, and this is just this abundance of family and life around you, and it's been a joyous end to this story, and a joyous beginning to a new one. But it really spoke to me about how you continue to see Blake as a child of God. And it's 1 Samuel 23 and 24. It says this: "The Lord will repay each man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I refuse to stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Now behold, as your life was highly valued in my sight this day, so may my life be highly valued in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me from all distress." And it just is so apparent in your story that he did.
Thank you. Yeah,
it's just
beautiful, Tanya.
Oh, well, I mean, it's the Lord's word, let's be honest. But yeah, no, I thought that is Anne-Maree's story, and praise God, he makes his word apparent in our lives. And I'm so blessed to have talked to you today and heard your story. Thank you so much for sharing it. I hope that you enjoyed talking about it all. I'm sorry for the tears.
It's just amazing how, it was 20 years ago, but going back to those places. But the tears are there, but the joy from the Lord is stronger, it's bigger, it's wider. So, I feel safe in allowing those tears to flow because of the blessing in my life, because of him. Thank you very much for having me, Tanya.
Oh, pleasure. May he bless you in all that you do with this story in this book and going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today. You can find out more about the show, subscribe to us, and catch up on past episodes by visiting www.thegospelacordingtomum.podbean.com. If you've been impacted by the conversation you've heard here, I encourage you to share the news with others. Subscribe to us on Facebook or Instagram to help spread the word about the show. Those who've known God in motherhood and what it is to walk with Christ have enormous scope to support those who are younger in the way. Please consider if you can share your experience of discipleship and contact us. In the meantime, be encouraged, friend, and remember the God who taught you to love will not leave you as you walk with him more and more at your own pace. I'm Tanya Reason, and you've been listening to The Gospel According to Mum. Till next time.